Good greetings. Good greetings. Imagine that you are a Nigerian importer. You have just received a shipment of footwear from Ghana. Your total shipment is set to retail for around $10,000. My question is, how much of this do you think is needed to cover freight cost from Accra to Lagos? I come again. Imagine that you are a Nigerian importer. You have just received a shipment of footwear from Ghana. Your total shipment is set to retail for $10,000. So, my question is, how much of this do you think is needed to cover freight costs from Accra to Lagos? Take your time. So I'm going to present you with some few options. The first option is very little. The trucker salary are quite low, less than $500. Roughly, the second option is roughly 1,000 to 1,500, assuming that the truck does not break down on the way. So the second option is like roughly between $1,000 to 1,500. The third option is between $3,000 and $4,000, keeping in mind you need to maintain the truck and pay for the gasoline throughout the journey. The third one is the answer. And that's right, because when you look at the state of transport and border post infrastructure in Africa, it remains poor. And its major impediment to the successful expansion of intra-African trade. In fact, several studies being done by World Bank and the infrastructure consortium of Africa have shown that poor roads, rail and harbor infrastructure adds to 30 to around 40% of the cost of goods traded among African countries. The topic of today is addressing Africa transport and border post infrastructure. So I want to share with you some of the insights and some of the nitty-gritty things that you need to understand as an SME. Because remember, an SME doesn't mean that you should just stay there and look at what is available there. What is available around you. An SME means that you have the power to move us very fast compared to bigger companies. You're very flexible. So if you see an opportunity, you go and seize it. So I'm going to share with you why transport infrastructure is a problem. Between 80 and 90% of intra-African trade is conducted by roads. Therefore, this makes it like the basic form of transportation and most important for Africa traders. However, the roads are not oftenly maintained and it remains problematic. The fact is, I think we have two main reasons for this. And one is the lack of availability of economical and effective tracking services. And the other thing is unpredictability of cost and delays in deliveries. That is that when you look at the road freight costs, they are much higher in Africa, and that in any other region of the world. In fact, UNCTAD has estimated that the road transport costs faced by African exporters amount to the average of 12.6%. You can imagine that, of the value of their goods. More than twice the world average of 6.1. So you see, we have a real problem that needs to be addressed, and we need to be very solvent when dealing with certain issues. Remember, the more expensive is for you to export or sell, or for you to distribute your goods, the more problematic it becomes. And for these reasons, road conditions in Africa are generally poor. This becomes a stress on the freight trucks and the tires. And on the overall, it brings what we call the vehicle maintenance cost and fuel consumption a bit high. The other thing is that we have relatively few transport operators in Africa, therefore competition is limited. You can imagine the most competitive route in the road under the corridor of the Southern African. The monopoly operator is actually in West Africa, which makes that corridor less competitive. Transport regulation between countries are not harmonized. This is a very serious, okay? They are very serious issues. You can imagine we have different rules for transport permits, third-party insurance, load limits, the driver permits, and these often need to be produced at every port of entry when transiting in multiple countries. So this becomes a prohibiting factor. Border posts play a pervasive role in contributing to the difficulty and the cost of engaging in intra-African trade. The efficiency of border posts varies widely from region to region within the Southern African, approaching developing country norms in terms of transit times, while Central and West African border posts often subject traders to lengthy delays between 10 to 30 hours. Corruption at border posts and roadblocks is a serious and significant problem. So I'm going to give you some tips, especially if you're conducting this kind of trades and you're looking for trade routes that won't affect the delivery of your goods. I'm going to share with you the most important road corridors in Africa. So the first one is from Morocco all the way to Algeria, go through Niger, and then you have Nigeria, you have access to Togo, and you can go as stretching towards more west towards Burkina Faso and Senegal. So that's trade route number 1, point 2. The other one is point 3. If you're using the upper northwest side of the ports, is the Egypt. If you're using the Mediterranean port, Egypt, if you are looking for a road network that will help you with your goods around the Eastern African corridors, I think the best route will be from the Mediterranean seaport to Egypt, down the way to Khartoum, Ethiopia. From Ethiopia, you have access to Djibouti. Also, you can go down below to Kenya, Tanzania, and from there you have road access to Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Angola. That is the easiest corridor. So we have Cairo to Dhaka, Algeria to Lagos, Tripoli to Windhoek, Cape Town. We have Cairo to Gaboa. We have Dhaka in Germany to Djibouti. We have Dhaka in Lagos, Mombasa Road. Lagos to Mombasa. And we have Lubito. So the major trans-African highway, they're those. So we have missing links, and we have other financed routes by African Development Bank around Zimbabwe, Namibia, Kenya, Cameroon, Nigeria, Togo. They are connecting Mauritius to the Western Sahara. And those guys have been working so that brings me to those businesses that they do operate around road construction, road maintenance, and you're looking like, okay, yes, we're not getting this maintenance job from the government on the roads. I would like to challenge you and this time think a bit broader. So what I have is I have access to a very limited document that contains infrastructure deficits and opportunities in Africa. So country don't feel threatened for you to want to become competitive among your industry and seizing the opportunities when you see the opportunities coming. There are other options of intra-African trade and rails, sea and air freight. But if you put together, currently we make only around 10 to 20% of intra-African trade. So the African railway lines are currently ill-suited to support the expanding intra-African trade. And under this chronicle under maintenance, railway is not an option. However, under the Southern and the Northern African, they are reliable. They have actually good infrastructure when it comes to that. So sea freight also is a little under 1% of the intra-African trade because majority of the African ports are not focused on the transshipment activities, and the regional surveys are poorly developed. So you can imagine the cost of a container from Durban to Rwanda, for example, is 3 times the shipping cost of a container from Durban to Rotterdam. That is serious. So the majority of air freight activities is concentrated in just a handful major hubs. We have Johannesburg, we have Nairobi, we have Addis Ababa, and smaller regional airports play nearly no part in handling air freight cargo. An air freight in Africa is prohibitive expensive, ranging between $3 to $7 per kilogram, compared with the international average, which is 1.5 to 4.5 per kilogram. So, from what I've shared, I think you guys will be in a position to ask yourself this question. So when, let's say I'm considering exporting to a country in any region, based on what I've learned, how much do you think I should be expected to add to the selling price for the transportation cost? I'm going to remind you, it's 12%, especially if you know. But international, imagine that percentage is around 6%. So those people or startups who are seeking foreign investment, reduce the cost. Okay? Be careful, do your research. You don't go there and sit at the table and discuss how we shape these terms based on their understanding. Considering the fact that right now, when you're dealing with shit, now the percentage you expect everyone to cover the distribution is a long process. So we need to sit at the table and discuss in Africa we have and if you are to compete in this wild business, the jungle business, you need to be ready and armed with actual. And from what you have understood, the challenge So, when considering intra-African export market, the availability and cost of transport is an important factor, and also what it does, it impacts the market selection. So, to stay competitive, I have some few tips I would like to share. Number one, identify a reputable service provider. This comes when it comes to freight forwarder and trucking company. Second, determine what service offering are in terms of routes, frequency, and cost. And third, identify the markets that can be reached using these services. And the fourth tip, do freight costing for the product to determine if it's still possible to be competitive in that market. Do follow the normal market research process and determine if the market is suitable based on other criteria. It is important to remember that many competitors to African exporters in Africa's markets are European or Asian suppliers who also need to use expensive African transport options to get their products to the market, often from farther away. So it's a good idea to keep in mind that exporting or export container traffic coming from Africa's big exporters, namely South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria, are currently often return empty. So African exporters located in these countries that do a lot of trade with these big economies may have the opportunities to procure cheap rates in loading their goods on these containers going back to these countries. So take advantage of that. And another consideration when it comes to air freight. For higher value products, exporters of high value items, air freight could be an option, as the freight rate is a lower percentage of the value of the product. In such a case, it is important to identify the air freight service provider with reach to lucrative African markets. For example, if you are an Ethiopian exporter of high value leather clothing, you may find that Ethiopian Airlines freight to be the best option to reach to the lucrative consumer market in Lagos, Nigeria. The major hubs of Addis Ababa, Johannesburg, and Nairobi present opportunities to connect with this lucrative market. So, planning for the future, it might be a good idea to keep in touch with the Exporters Association, freight forwarder, to find out what future developments are taking place in your region so that you can plan for those updates. So, I'm going to share with you some few examples of projects that could improve access to African markets. We have a one-stop border post, which are a very crucial part of the infrastructure development necessary to intra-African trade. They involve setting up of legal and institutional frameworks associated with procedure to enable traders to stop in just one single facility at the border, where agents from both countries cooperate to apply the necessary controls, allowing efficient and speedy processing. The first one-stop shop border post in Africa was set up as a pilot in 2009 at the Shirundu border post between Zambia and Zimbabwe. It quickly showed a positive impact, reducing traveling time across the border from 4 to 5 days to under 3 days, a few hours. If proper pre-crossing procedures were done, as of 2010, this infrastructure development, they have been able to complete around, I think, 12 one-stop shop border posts. Some of them, no, I think it's 10, and 12 are still under construction. So it might be a good idea to find out whether your country is set to benefit from this one-stop border point or border posts in the future, so that you can align and tap into that growing market. So I would like for you to describe the situation for your country in your own way of understanding or your research, and find out whether you have any transport corridors available to you, and if there is any other competitive transport service providers that can deliver your product to other African countries at a much more cost-effective rate. So I would like for you to do that and put that closer to your notebook. So once again, thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Benson. Ciao.